Now, Isaiah 66:1, heaven is my throne and earth is my footstool. That imagery of God sitting on his throne with his feet resting on a footstool is intended to convey the idea of rest, divine rest. So, for example, if we're thinking about the tabernacle and later the temple, which are later miniature microcosmic redemptive replications of the original creation, the original cosmic temple that God created, whenever the glory cloud, the Spirit of God, the Shekinah glory filled the tabernacle or the temple, the idea was that God was coming to rest on his holy throne, placing his feet on the footstool. Right, the Lord is enthroned above the cherubim, the two cherubim that are on the golden slab that sat on top of the Ark of the Covenant. That slab was God's footstool. That's
Hmm.
identified as God's footstool, I believe, in Chronicles 28, first or second. I can't remember which one now.
Wonderful.
But one of the most helpful passages with regard to interpreting the divine Sabbath in Genesis 2 is Psalm 132. So maybe I can read 4 verses from Psalm 132.
Sure.
This is a psalm which refers especially to God's covenant with David. And it says in Psalm 132, verse 7, let us go to his dwelling place. Let us worship at his footstool. Now, here the Israelites are speaking to one another as they're making their way to the temple of God in Jerusalem. And his temple is referred to first as his dwelling place, secondly as his footstool. Let us go to his dwelling place. Let us worship at his footstool. And then verse 8, arise, O Lord, go to your resting place, you and the ark of your might. So his dwelling place is his resting place. Now in verse 13, it says, for the Lord has chosen Zion, that's the mountain on which the temple of God in Jerusalem was built. He has desired it for his dwelling place. Verse 14, the Lord himself speaks, this is my resting place forever. Here I will dwell, for I have desired it. So twice in that psalm, God's dwelling place is called his resting place, verses 7 and 8, and then 13 and 14. And so God's dwelling place is his resting place. His heavenly temple in the invisible realm is his dwelling place, his resting place. And the visible replicas of that heavenly temple on earth also constitute his dwelling place and his resting place. And the earth itself was that original cosmic visible replica of that heavenly temple. So after God completes the creation of his cosmic temple, heaven and earth, he enters his dwelling place and comes to rest in his dwelling place. He rests in his dwelling place. He goes to his resting place. He sits his feet or he sits on his throne in the heavenly dwelling, and he places his feet on the earth, on the footstool. Heaven is my throne, earth is my footstool. So he sits on his throne in heaven. He places his feet on the earth, which is his footstool. So in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. He created heaven as his throne and earth as his footstool. He created for himself a cosmic temple and then rested on his throne in the temple, placing his feet on his footstool. So in Genesis 2, verse 1, thus the heavens and the earth were finished and all the host of them. God finished creating his cosmic temple. And then in verse 2, on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done. He finished constituting his cosmic house, his dwelling and resting place. And so he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. His dwelling place becomes his resting place. So I think the idea there is, of course, that he sat down on his throne in the highest heaven and then placed his feet on the earth as his footstool. That's what it means to say, I believe, that God rested. The word rest doesn't simply mean cessation of labor, though it does come after the completion of a work, which is very important, work followed by rest. And the purpose of rest, whenever it's applied to God, is certainly not to recover from fatigue.
Right.
Right.
Or cessation of all types of work. God continues to sustain the earth by the word of his power.
Right. Yes.
But he ceased his works of creation.
For sure.
Amen.
Yes.
Yep. How does this connect, might we say, at least in Old Testament biblical imagery, to a very well-known psalm such as 110, where the Lord says to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool? clearly there needs to be at least some context of subjection and lordship. But do you see rest evidence there as well? As in the Lord's victory, now he has had the victory and he enters into rest, no longer fighting.
Yes, absolutely. So the author of Hebrews reflects back on Genesis chapter 2 and quotes verse 2 in particular in Hebrews 4. And then he makes gives the exhortation to his readers that there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. And this is Hebrews chapter 4, I think it's verse 7, if I recall. Therefore, there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God, and then he exhorts them to strive to enter that rest.
Sure, that's 6 and 7, yeah. Since therefore it remains for some to enter it, and those who formerly received the good news failed to enter because of disobedience, again he appoints a certain day, today, saying through David so long afterward, in the words already quoted, today if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. Even backing up, should say, verse 3, for we who have believed enter that rest, as he had said, as I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest, although his works were finished from the foundation of the world, for he has spoken, of the seventh day in this way, and God rested on the seventh day from all his works. And again, in this passage, he said, they shall not enter my rest.
Yes, that's a very important text with regard to understanding the divine Sabbath in Genesis 2. The author of Hebrews makes it clear that Genesis 2 is not merely describing something about God. It's not merely descriptive of God. It's prescriptive for man. The rest that God entered on the seventh day, we must strive to enter ourselves. We must strive to enter that rest. It's prescriptive for us. And the point I was going to make here, you brought up Psalm 110, verse 1. The book of Hebrews is an exposition. Right, it's a lengthy exposition of
word of exhortation, he says.
Word of exhortation,
mm-hmm.
Yeah, which is a Hellenistic idiom for sermon.
Mm-hmm.
It's used in the book of Acts, chapter 13, verse 15, where it says, after the reading of the law and the prophets, the rulers of the synagogue sent a message to Paul saying, if you have a word of exhortation, give it. And Paul stood up and gave it. He gave the sermon. So it's a idiom for sermon. And Hebrews is an exposition of Psalm 110. And several times in the book of Hebrews, the author makes the point that Christ finished his work of redemption. Like, for example, Hebrews 1:3, having made purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the majesty on high. That's the highest heaven, that invisible realm. And then in Hebrews chapter 10, he makes the contrast between the priest who offer daily sacrifices which can never take away sins, but this one, Christ, the greater high priest, after having offered himself once and for all as a sacrifice for sins, he sat down. So the main point is that God's rest, his Sabbath rest, the divine Sabbath rest that occurs in the upper register, is his royal session from his heavenly throne as the King of glory, as the King of heaven and earth, which he created for his cosmic temple.